The intention behind this project when I started was to produce a book that would be a long-form project, a year-long psychogeographic journal of Swansea, including within it an empirical charting of an urban existence on a hill by the sea over the course of the year. But together with that, there'd be a chronophotographic typology of the sky and an experiential record of localized manifestations of weather. The idea being not that any of these in themselves would be the end result, but that it would build a body of data that I could then respond to and make work from. I tend to approach most of my work from the starting perspective that mankind has gone wrong somewhere along the way. With this project, the title, No One Talks About the Weather Anymore, actually stems from a possibly apocryphal piece of trivia that I came across about 10 years ago. That weather, that great cliche of small talk, had been displaced, and that the most popular topic these days was television. And that to me was emblematic of the kind of the disassociation of humanity from nature that for me is the root cause of a lot of issues within society and within the world. And this is a point that was actually made by Adorno and Horkheimer in their dialectic of the Enlightenment, because to my mind it is the age of enlightenment that is at the root cause of many of these issues with its kind of logocentric anthropocentrism. And Adorno and Horkheimer actually said that the Enlightenment was the transition away from mankind being dominated by nature and instead moving into mankind's domination over nature, or domination of nature. This idea of domination or control over nature is clearly represented through commonly used abstracted mathematical constructions in everyday life, such as calendars, clocks, or maps. But this theme of control also applies within photography. In the analog age, the photographer would relinquish control of the creative process in the very act of capturing an image. It was a stochastic interplay of light and chemistry that excluded human access. The photographer could only choose when to begin and when to end the process. In the age of computational photography, the photographer relinquishes control in a much wider sense. The image capture actually begins with a relationship between the subject and the algorithm. The shutter release has become a skeuomorph, providing a vestigial trace of a control that never was. This idea of control over the creative process has been addressed as well by Hito Steyerl. In her paper, In Freefall, A Thought Experiment on Vertical Perspective, she traces the idea of perspective back to the horizon being a mathematical abstraction itself. She said, in her own words, "This space defined by linear perspective is calculable, navigable, and predictable. It allows the calculation of future risk, which can be anticipated and therefore managed." Steyerl goes on to discuss how linear perspective was displaced by the acceleration of technologies. The fixed horizon of sailing was displaced by the varying horizon of flight, which was itself displaced by the freefall perspectives of satellites and drones. In her own words, this displacement of perspective creates a disembodied and remote-controlled gaze, outsourced to machines and other objects. Wanting to explore this notion further, I started looking into neural networks and deepfake generative engines, and so for the purposes of this project, essentially I've outsourced my creative response to machines. The semiotician Charles Peirce said a symbol is a sign which would lose the character which renders it a sign if there were no interpretant. The interpretant, that which is required for the interpreter to make sense of the symbol, is located within a quasi-mind. This quasi-mind could be language, it could be cultural conditioning. Arguably, the quasi-mind can be non-human, hence human understanding of animal behaviours, such as explanations of mating rituals or territoriality. I suggest that the hidden layer of a neural network functions as a non-human quasi-mind. Even if all the original inputs were human, the recursive iterations of the digital realm have multiplied that data beyond human conception or perception. This quasi-mind is beyond human access, yet produces outputs that are accessible by humans. The words and images created can be, in the case of a deepfake generative engine, indistinguishable from human creative works. In the following short film, you'll see 6 days taken from the year-long project. First, you'll see the image of the sky taken by myself, with a voiceover of the journal entry for that day. followed by an algorithmically produced image generated from the text of my journal entry, and the voiceover read by myself has also been generated by a neural network from a sentence or fragment of the journal entry for that day. Essentially, the idea of the technological outsourcing of creative response highlights the fallacy of creativity being a uniquely human attribute. If you accept that I'm a photographer because I used a camera as a tool to produce an image, then it follows that you have to accept that I'm a poet because I used a deepfake generative engine to produce a text. Woken to grey by the miasma of the neighbour, idling in the street again. Chill winds and the ubiquitous white noise of city traffic below persists through the day. Woken to grey by the miasma of the neighbour's piss and heroin, Stevie peered out of the grimy window. Fresh snow blanketed the streets and the bins were covered with heaps of rubbish. The dark, snowy streets, glowing with neon lights from the shop signs and hair salons of the brothel and the city centre pubs, lent an icy air to the room. Stevie turned on the electric blanket, nestling into the lumpy pillow, and went back to sleep. It's not just snow. It's not just the boredom of sitting at home bored. Boredom has become a sticky word to me now. Early, cold and grey. I heard a cockerel crow twice this morning. Unsettled. Chill wind and drizzle. A day to be thankful for socks. A day to be thankful for socks and scarves. Today I went to see the Superman movie and was really enjoying it until the second to last scene, when I was suddenly thinking about how people still think he can fly, and I began to picture his fatal crash and started to cry. Good thing I was alone in the theatre. Helicopters haunt the night with their insufferable whir. The birds herald a glorious morning that rapidly boils over into oppressive heat. A good day to sit in the shade. Helicopters haunt the night with their insufferable whir. Cops bark at the neighbours on the other side of a thin wall. Tiny droplets of rain tinkle on the pavement. I am reenacting a dream. The clanking and droning of car horns and tyre screeches comes from all sides. Raucous start at 4 a.m. Found the hill under a heavy storm. Childlike, staring out of the window, watching for lightning flashes and counting to time the thunder. Adult affectations of indifference, the civilized superiority of shelter displaced by the brute power of the world outside. Rain followed for most of the day. The civilized superiority of shelter and imagination, where there's a carpet in the wind and steel on the seas. These and all these will protect us. So let us go with the same courage that would take us to the gallows. A thoroughly wet start again. Loquacious magpies fill the gaps between the drips. Brighter from mid-morning to dusk, but an oddly listless atmosphere. Night as warm as day again. Loquacious magpies fill the gaps between the drips of passing seagulls, bringing them news about the outside world. Little pug-nosed Goulburn magpies hop, hop, hop around their little patch of heath. They add little tidbits to the choir. Grape, top of the pops. The pearly jays do a manky drum solo as they stomp and shove their way to the top of the highest branch of the hawthorn. Cloudless blue heat shimmer. The city is sirens and shouting. Red-faced, shirtless men and junkies pavement slumped. The hill is a sanctuary above. Shouting, red-faced, shirtless men and junkies pavement slumped in pools of vomit and blood. In the meanwhile, John, outside the hospital, crouches over a dead, corpse-spattered bird. His was the last victim of a bullet to the throat. Jesus Christ, what have we done? He mutters to himself. He wipes the blood and feathers away, smears them onto his skin.